So, well, I'd like to begin by sort of thanking the Pontifical Academy for inviting me. It's a great honour to be speaking here today. So I've rewrote my talk a little bit last night, partly is without knowing exactly who you're going to be talking to. You realise that some of the things you thought were going to be uncontroversial are going to be extremely controversial, and other things that you thought would be controversial maybe will be less so. So I thought I'd begin by saying a little bit by way of orientation, just to sort of to explain where I'm coming from, who I am, what some of my assumptions are in thinking about this. Oops. So I'm a philosopher rather than a physician or a biologist. Most of my work is on the philosophy of public health. I'm interested in big picture questions about justice, health equity, how we should design health systems, particularly with an aim to improving the health of the people who are very worst off. And in addition to that, as a kind of additional job I do on the side, I've been advising various bits of the English NHS on how to deal with patients' data for the last 5 or 6 years. And this has often led to various sorts of amazing sorts of tussles, and it's been remarkably controversial because we've had a government that often has pushed very hard to try to get wider and deeper data sharing, often to allow commercialization of data. And at the same time, there's been a great sort of pushback from individual doctors, from general practitioners, particularly from members of the public. And so that one of the things that we've learnt in the UK at least is that it's been really quite difficult to maintain that public trust, and it was lost through a particular program known as Care.Data, which Tim Kelsey, when he was in charge of the NHS's data, tried to push forward quite sort of precipitately in 2013. So partly because of that, it led me to a certain sort of reticence about, well, how much data do we want to be collecting, how do we think about it, how do we govern it, and to realise that some of those questions are likely to be much more controversial than we might initially have thought. And one of the things I should say is that the boundaries of my thinking, or at least where I start from in thinking about the design of healthcare systems, what a good healthcare system would be like, is the healthcare system where I live in the UK, where we have our National Health Service. We have a single-payer health system. So that part of what I'm thinking about what precision medicine could be, it's often thinking in the context of the NHS, and which I hope doesn't sort of make it sort of difficult to understand what I'm going to say, or we can talk about how context matters in what follows. So one of the things that working in a system like a single-payer system like the NHS teaches you is that the resources that we have for protecting, promoting health are always going to be limited, and that one feature of healthcare systems across the whole world is you've seen healthcare budgets, in places that can afford it, healthcare budgets have been rising, so that in the NHS budget, the budget has risen by an average of about sort of 4% or so above inflation since 1948. But that there's also a general acceptance that partly because of the way that people have started to think about governments and the amount of tax that they want to pay. There's actually quite sort of limited desire to pay more tax in order to fund further healthcare. So there seems to be this sense that, well, partly as a result of the very success or the brilliance of the healthcare and the innovations we've had, people are now living longer, needs are getting more expensive to meet, but we don't have any more money to meet those needs. So that healthcare systems across the world, particularly single-payer ones, are trying to do more with less as they go forward. So the uncomfortable implication of that, and it's one that we face very obviously in our NHS, is that it's not possible to provide all the healthcare or all the public health that ideally we'd like to provide. So we have to face hard questions of prioritization. So just to sort of hammer this home, and I just to show that hard ethical choices are absolutely unavoidable. So that where we have a fixed budget system where there's scarcity, if we want to bring in a new innovation, then very often we're going to have to decommission something that we're already doing. So doing something new may mean doing something less of what we already do. So that insofar as we want to bring in new drugs, new interventions, which are precision medicine interventions, that may mean that there's less space for other sorts of interventions. Now, This is why I maybe have asked a couple of questions about cost effectiveness already during the workshop, because the worry is that if precision medicine interventions are less cost effective than what we're doing already, then you're going to, be, as it were, become less efficient as a system overall, that somewhere in the system you may not know exactly where health will be lost. And one of the things that was extraordinary in the UK was that in 2010, our then Prime Minister, David Cameron, invented something he described as the Cancer Drugs Fund. And now, this was a special fund of £200 million that he said he wanted to provide for drugs that had been assessed by our NICE, and basically where NICE had said that drug is not cost effective enough to be provided in the NHS system. And he said, well, I'm going to set aside a special fund of £200 million in order to pay for these new cancer drugs that have been deemed not cost effective enough. People say, well, marvellous, people get access to these drugs, and they say, well, where's the money coming from? Is there extra money? He said, no. And in the few years of this fund's existence, it turned out to be a way of basically providing access to new and good drugs for people who needed them. But money was taken from elsewhere in the budget, and when people have looked at the analyses of it, it seems erasing certainty that more people died as a result of the cancer drugs funds than were saved by it, by quite some margin. So that it's a hard truth to have to contemplate, but that if we bring in on stream really quite cost-ineffective medicines and we decommission things that are more cost-effective, then we may lead to more deaths overall. So I think that part of the always sort of cross-purposes talk we've had sometimes in the meeting so far has been about sort of also two different framings. So one different framing is, if you like, the optimistic framing. It's the one that often precision medicine is looked at through. The question here will be something like, well, what would the best healthcare for each individual look like, assuming that there was unlimited budgets to collect data and unlimited budgets to pay for testing, unlimited budgets to pay for treatments? But how about if we ask a different kind of question, which is, well, how should a society with a limited budget and which aims to use those resources equitably allocate this budget between precision medicine and competing priorities such as non-precision medicine, ordinary medicine and public health? I take it that number two is actually the decision that we face in single-payer systems. It's not like we've suddenly got a new pool of money in order to pay for precision medicine. So insofar as we're funding it, we may be raiding other budgets, and in the UK we've already seen public health budgets somewhat reduced in order to pay for particularly precision drug therapies. And so I think that if the question is basically number one, what would the best healthcare look like without leaving budget restrictions on one side, then it seems like precision medicine could very plausibly play a really core role in that. But if our question is two, it's one in which we say we take into account limited budgets, we take into account the need for equity, then I think it's much less clear that precision medicine should play a large role. And for some of the reasons we've heard already from Donna perhaps and from Barbara, it may be that if we think that two is the right question, then it may look that it's actually quite dangerous to give too much weight to precision medicine. It may be that it will take us away from our core goal of promoting the health of the population as a whole. So the main argument I'm going to make is pretty much as follows, so that people often presuppose that sort of precision medicine must be by definition better than, as it were, non-precision medicine. But I'm going to suggest that there's various contexts, particularly when we look at public health, where it turns out that there's actually quite strong reasons to go for untargeted interventions or less well-targeted interventions. So that it seems that precision is only a good thing in certain sorts of contexts. And that another point we'll look at is that both precision medicine and also public health claim to be preventive, but there seems to be some quite good reasons to prefer the approach to prevention that you see in traditional public health over the approach to prevention that you see in precision medicine. And for the reasons I've already mentioned, it looks like public health is often going to be much more cost-effective than precision medicine as a basis for health policy. So overall, I'm going to suggest by the end of the talk that if we're trying to give an answer to what I cited as my second question, then it looks like public health looks like it's a much more plausible answer than precision medicine. Okay. So I guess as we've already heard, everybody already knows here, in order to actually make a precision intervention, you need to do various sorts of things. So first of all, you need to collect a lot of data. You need then to do some modeling, stratification, trying to work out on the basis of whether the genomic data or other data you have, what sorts of diseases is that person at risk for, what sorts of drug interventions will be successful for them. Then after that, we need to sort of work out, well, do we have any interventions that are actually good given what we know about that individual? Then we need to apply that intervention. As we heard already today, there may be gaps at various of those stages. So it may be that you have the intervention that will in fact work, but for various reasons, the patient doesn't adhere very well to it, and so you fail to get the health benefit that you might want. So in some ways, it seems such an obvious question. It seems so obvious that the idea of precision is better than imprecision, that you don't see many actual arguments for why is it that precision per se is an important virtue in medicine. So as far as I can tell, there seem to be two main reasons that you can find in the literature or talking to people for why it is that precision is a really good thing. The first one would be what I call the problem of spillover effects. The idea that, well, if you don't target things precisely, then you'll apply the intervention to some people who shouldn't get that intervention. So that if you precisely targeted that intervention, you'd only give it to particular individuals, but if it's sloppily targeted or untargeted, you'll apply the intervention to all sorts of people who shouldn't have it. A second sort of reason you find in the literature is one that the idea that there's a link between precision and cost effectiveness, that if we precisely target our interventions, then that'll end up more cost effective than if we sort of apply them just in a blanket way. I'm going to suggest that in fact neither of these are particularly compelling arguments. So first about this question of spillover effect, so that it's important to notice that where we have these spillover effects, where we, for example, don't target an intervention particularly precisely, then the different things that could happen to the people who are, call them the untargeted, the people who receive the intervention who we might not necessarily have intended to receive the intervention. They could either be harmed by that intervention, maybe they get an adverse drug reaction, for example, or it could make no difference to them. They receive the intervention, but they're neither harmed by it nor benefited by it. Or thirdly, they could be actually benefited by the intervention. And I take it that where the individuals are either completely unaffected by the intervention or in fact are benefited by the intervention, there doesn't seem to be any particular kind of ethical or practical worry to be had there. So you haven't harmed anybody, so what would the problem be? Now, there's maybe a longer story to be had here, but that it's important to notice that some of the sorts of interventions we make, particularly in the context of public health or state-supported research, are precisely designed to create these sorts of positive spillover effects. So we talked a little bit this morning about the idea of knowledge as a public good, or the way in which public research on the genome was done, or the sort of research that Christopher was talking about this morning about almost sort of doing that public goods research into how we can improve translational efficiency across the pathway. So there may be all sorts of things where we have one particular goal in mind, in some particular benefit, but we've created a public good. There's all sorts of spillovers from that. That's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. That's why it is that we think it's important to create public goods in the first place. Second kind of example is what I would describe as network goods. So that, for example, knowing a language, if you know a language and there's hardly anybody else who speaks your language, then that's not very useful. But if you know a language and lots of other people speak your language, then that's really that's beneficial to you, the fact that more people speak your language. Or similarly, in a case like vaccination, it's a benefit for the individual who, for example, receives a measles vaccination, but also is a benefit from the fact that other people are vaccinated as well, and so that there's a benefit to everybody by ensuring that as many people are vaccinated as possible. So I take it that both of these two sorts of examples show that where our aim is to create either public goods or network goods, then there seems to be a very strong reason not to apply interventions precisely, but precisely to say, well, either in the case of the public goods, where we just create it and then everybody can benefit, or in the case of the network good, to say, well, we have this good which gets better the more people use it, the more people have it, so we need to spread it as widely as possible. Now, I think there'll be other cases where what I describe as the non-negative spillover. There may be a room for putting this into the previous category, but the one thing that really struck me is if you look at different sorts of ways of doing medicine, I became fascinated by the idea of mass drug administration as an approach to neglected tropical diseases. Now, if you're treating something like schistosomiasis, it turns out to be much more cost-effective basically to do mass drug administration across a whole population. It's much more cost-effective than it would be to actually treat people, do the testing to see who has the parasite, then only treat those people who have the parasite. Rather, just administer a drug to a whole population at a time. You can do it for 50 cents per person per year. And that in cases like, as long as we have no ill effects from taking the drugs, if it's unnecessary, you can say, well, sure, there's spillover, sure, we're giving drugs to people who don't need to have them, but that what we're doing is we're creating a very significant health benefit. We're creating that very significant health benefit amazingly cost-effectively. So what's the problem? So it might look like not only a good policy, but a compelling policy to adopt, one in which you knowingly administering drugs to people who don't need them or people who won't benefit from them, so long as nobody is harmed by that. And last, I guess this is a point we've touched on a few times already, but I think the sort of the implicit assumption that somehow precisely targeting interventions more precisely will make them more cost-effective is not at all obviously correct in these sorts of cases. So we've seen that sort of stratification, precision targeting of pharmaceuticals entails that the size of the target market is much smaller than it might otherwise have been, and that given that the size of the target market is very significantly reduced while the cost of drug development may be not that much lower at all, the expectation would be that the prices are going to be very much higher. And certainly it's something we saw very vividly in the talk that Christopher gave this morning. That's the sheer difference in prices that we see between drugs for common conditions versus orphan versus ultra-orphan conditions. And so that the important point seems to be that it may be true that, well, we precisely target that drug so we reduce wastage. In fact, we can even completely eliminate wastage, so we've precisely targeted the people who will benefit from this drug. But if the drug is going to cost $200,000 plus per person per year, then we may not have done something which is cost-effective at all compared to other things that we could have done with the same resources. So I guess the interim conclusion would be that, well, targeting interventions isn't always an appropriate goal. It depends on the types of goods we're attempting to create, and also the likelihood and the severity of the negative spillover effects that we might experience. So I take it that P4 medicine is in the name, it aims to be predictive, personalized, preventive, participatory. It purports to be a systems medicine approach, and like other systems approaches in other sorts of domains, it pursues a path that's holistic and quantified. And that one of the things you notice through some of that literature is that as a critique of earlier approaches, which as it were not systematic, they weren't rigorous enough in thinking broadly, systematically enough about human health. So it's an approach which seems to, as far as I can tell, try to take everything into account that's relevant to thinking about human health and use that as a basis for thinking about the medicine of the future. And if that's correct, then I think there's sort of worry. I suspect that nearly everybody's going to object to this argument, but you have to tell me what's wrong with the argument. So I'll lay it out step by step. First one would just say that, well, I think that anything that makes a difference to health and disease ought to be relevant to P4 medicine, premise one. Second would be that things like the social determinants of health, food policy, transport policy, levels of income inequality, all the sorts of things that people like Michael Marmot and others have written about for many, many years. There's good evidence to say that these sorts of things make a difference to disease and wellness in the community. So that I take it that P4 medicine ought to integrate interventions on the social determinants of health within its model, or at least in theory it ought to, and that if social determinants of health interventions are a more effective means of achieving health and wellness, then I take it that P4 medicine ought to recommend such interventions over individual level interventions. And I guess the empirical premise is, I think it's true to say that social determinants of health interventions are in fact usually preferable to individual level interventions, as they're both more equitable and also more cost effective. So this requires us to think a little bit more about the idea of prevention. So that one of the P's is preventive, and that sometimes the rhetoric around P4 medicine seems to make a lot of the fact that that P4 medicine is, as it were, is preventive by being personalised. But that I think if we return to public health, then we see that there's no particular necessary connection between being successful prevention and being personalised. In fact, we can see within public health that the most effective prevention campaigns are often ones which are relatively generic. It's about sort of removing generic health threats from the environment, something like reducing air pollution. You don't need to target in anyone in particular in order to do that. You just need to stop people polluting. So, within the literature on public health, it's often, it's taken for granted that there's sort of three different levels of prevention. So that primary prevention is about reducing the risk of disease or injury before it occurs. So something like an anti-smoking campaign would count as primary prevention. Secondary prevention is when you aim to diagnose disease early in order to allow interventions that will minimize its effect. For example, cancer screening might be an example of that. Tertiary prevention aims to minimize the effects of disease or injury that's already severe enough to have made some kind of noticeable difference to the patient's life. So it might be rehabilitation programs after a stroke might be a good example of that, where you're trying to bring the patient back just to some kind of decent level of functioning after a functional loss. Now, I take it that public health classically focuses on primary prevention, but that, as far as I could tell, precision medicine would usually be thought of as a kind of secondary prevention. It may be that, for what Lee was telling us about yesterday, the scientific wellness program, it may be that that counts as a kind of primary prevention, but I'm going to suggest in a moment that even if it does count as primary prevention, it may not be as effective a form of primary prevention as public health would be in any case. So, the interesting thing about the kind of rhetoric of P4 medicine is that it argues that it's an advantage to go for a preventive approach because it compares its preventive approach to standard clinical medicine, where it seems that standard clinical medicine is focusing mostly on tertiary prevention, as we're waiting till people actually get ill and say, well, we're doing something better, we're looking at people who might be about to get ill, who are incipiently ill, then we're going to intervene in that case. But that I have a worry in that case. Well, if the virtue is supposed to be, if getting in early is a virtue which means we should move from tertiary prevention to secondary prevention, doesn't the very same argument say that we should shift from secondary prevention to primary prevention? Wouldn't that be even better? And as far as I could tell, that seemed to be part of the sort of argument that Lee was giving us yesterday. That seemed to be part of the argument for a shift to this sort of scientific wellness approaches. But I think that the very same argument is also an argument for classic public health approaches. Oops. So, just to remind you of maybe one or two things you're probably already well aware of, but that for people like me who mostly specialize in public health, the reason why we're so interested in primary prevention is because it seems to provide what we think of as better ways of protecting and promoting health than almost any other way of doing it. So that it seems to have the advantage that you can remove threats from the environment before they start to have any ill effects. And also, often people argue that, well, if you have interventions at a social level, then they can be much less invasive than in secondary or tertiary prevention would be. And they can often also be more cost effective. And that one argument which holds particular sway for me is that often primary prevention can be much more equitable than other forms of prevention because it provides a much more effective way of benefiting the people who are worst off and might otherwise be difficult to reach. One important aspect, and why I focused on the idea of precision early, is that it seems to be an obvious fact about primary prevention as it's taken forward in public health, that it doesn't usually need to be precisely targeted. It draws on, for example, the creation of public goods, of network goods, and so it can create the sort of benefits that it has without having to know too much about the individuals it's benefiting, without having to target its interventions particularly precisely. Compare that with scientific wellness as we had it described yesterday. So insofar as scientific wellness is going to be effective as a form of primary prevention, it seems to require us to know an awful lot about each individual, and for those individuals then become hyper-vigilant about their own health and well-being. Now, this may be just a matter of the way that we view the world, but that there may be sort of reasons that many people can think about where we might prefer other things being equal to have a world in which those people who have power over you, know less about you, in which you're less legible to those who have power over you than a world in which you're more legible to those who have power over you. And so you might think that insofar as we can get the same sort of effects from public health measures where we don't need to know very much about individuals, that might be preferable to one in which we create similar sorts of effects, but just by knowing an awful lot about each and every individual. Oops. So, yeah. So I think where this leaves us to conclude is, I suggest that there's sort of two different ways of framing what's at issue here. The first way of framing what's at issue is to think in very idealized terms and say, well, leave questions of budget entirely on one side, think, well, what would be the very best healthcare for an individual be like? And thinking in that way, personalization, precise targeting seems to make a lot of sense, or at least it seems a plausible answer to the question. But I've given you various reasons over the last 20 minutes or so, hopefully, to think that, well, insofar as the question is actually the second one, and we're thinking about a limited health budget, and where our goal is not just, as it were, to enable particular individuals who are well off to maximize their own health, but to think about how to improve health equity within a population, there may be a strong reason to say, well, we should be investing in public health rather than in precision medicine approaches. So I think that was pretty much all I had for you there. I hope it's been a sufficient provocation for various people to ask me some questions. So thank you.